All right, good afternoon and welcome to the Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar Series. I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University. Also have Liz Ripley on as well. Liz is going to help us with as we get to the questions toward the end. But hope you're all having a great day, and we're really fortunate to have, I think, another good webinar coming up. One I think is very relevant and hopefully we'll answer some questions that we've gotten on past webinars when there's been some prairie discussions. So this week we are fortunate to have Dr. Laura Jackson, who is the director of the Tallgrass Prairie Center at the University of Northern Iowa and a professor of biology, at UNI. She has with her Dr. Justin Meissen and Andy Olson, both with the Tallgrass Prairie Center. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jackson. And if you have questions, please type those in the chat box and we will get those to the Tallgrass Prairie Center team at the end of Dr. Jackson's talk. So with that, Laura, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you, Matt. And thanks for the invitation to present today. So I'm going to talk about planting, and managing prairie based on our research and on-farm experience. And I couldn't do this without the research efforts of Justin Meissen and Andy Olson's work with farmers on the ground. This is a collaboration. Tallgrass Prairie Center is devoted to empowering people to value and restore diverse, resilient tallgrass prairie. We're all about prairie and really all about plants around here. We're really focusing on ways to make prairie restoration, wherever it's done, more successful. This is our team, at least in June. That was our team. The students and AmeriCorps members kind of rotate through. And we have a lot of support from various partners and funders, including, of course, Iowa State STRIPS program, of which we are a collaborating member of that group. So here we are in the middle of the former Tallgrass Prairie region, and as I'm sure most of you are quite familiar with and aware of the fact that we only have 0.1% of those original tallgrass prairies left. We're the most impacted state in the Union. There's probably less original habitat here than any other place on the planet, actually, at least in northern Iowa. So we have really lost a lot, and the little remnants that we do have, those precious little spots, 20 acres here, 2 acres there, are also increasingly endangered by various pressures on them. So that makes our work feel really critical and important. And so it also means that we're really focused on seed-based restoration. We can't count on nature to sort of take over and rewild on its own. There's just not enough seed out there on the landscape to accomplish that in our part of the world. So the work that I'll be talking about today is focused on seed mix design and the qualities of seeds, of prairie seeds, and how we can use that knowledge to do more successful work in as practitioners, planting for CRP, for roadsides, for other projects. So just a little bit about the Tallgrass Prairie Center and our background. We began in 1988 when a law was passed, the state code, making it part of the function of our public roadsides to be managed in an ecological manner for diverse purposes. And as a result, UNI was established as sort of a hub for supporting the counties that chose to give their roadsides a more ecological approach, which included spot spraying, reduced mowing, more of a IPM type of an approach to weeds, and critically the use of diverse native plants in the roadsides to help limit weed issues and to just diversify the roadside. So we help with various things. We apply for a federal grant and distribute native seed to the counties. There's about 57 counties that participate right now. And this is the original Prairie Strip along Iowa's roadsides. There's the participation of the different counties, and you can see it varies quite a bit from county to county in terms of number of years they've picked up native seed. In conjunction with that, early in the 90s, we began a plant materials program to help provide the stock seed for commercial seed companies. As I mentioned, it's not possible to get native seed from remnants anymore. They're just too small and too scattered. And the commercially available seed was all from the Great Plains. It wasn't really adapted to Iowa, and it certainly wasn't helping to restore Iowa's lost biodiversity by importing prairie, switchgrass seed from western Oklahoma. So we began a program to collect tiny amounts of seed from the remnants that are still out there, grow it out in our seed production plots at the Tallgrass Prairie Center, and then release it to native seed companies as stock seed. And then those seed companies could then market their seed as Iowa source seed from Iowa remnants. And it's certified by a third party, and it gets this yellow tag, and they're able to charge a little more for it. So that has really generated a lot of diversity and protected or rescued really a lot of the genetic diversity that is remaining through this program. We've released about 89 species in the last 30 some years as a result of that program, and it's still going strong. The other day we were cleaning seeds of hairy mountain mint, and it smelled like hairy mountain mint throughout the whole building. So most of our equipment facilities revolve around this seed production that we're doing. Another major program is Urban Prairie. In 2018, Kathy Irvin in Benton County donated land to UNI, to the Tallgrass Prairie Center, to create a place where people can come and see what prairie used to look like. And so we've been able to gradually plant a few acres at a time, monitor, really keep track of what we're doing so that we can learn from mistakes and continue to get better. And all of that data and maps and stuff are available so other people can learn from this too. It's got a conservation easement on it through the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. So it's protected in perpetuity. And then we have a Prairie on Farms program. This is a newer program, but we began working in 2015 to put prairie strips, demonstration sites on farms in eastern Iowa. We've accumulated about 12 of them that we have worked with. We do the seed purchase, design the seed mixes, try to design it to learn something and to be able to demonstrate some principles. We also just work with those farmers and landowners and help them to make it as successful of a planting as we can. We follow up with weed issues, tree saplings, Canada thistles, so the landowner is aware of what those management issues might be. This also generated a kind of a side project that's been really fun, to use a tile camera to go down and look underneath these prairie strips to see if they're getting any problems with roots in the tile line from the prairie plants. And because that's a typical question that people ask before they make a decision about using prairie strips. So we have an exhilarating tile line footage that you can watch on our website. And pretty much prairie plants don't get into tile lines, but see for yourself. Check out the videos. And there are various other resources on our website, which is in the process of being renovated. So the work I'll talk about today is sort of a combination of the work of Prairie on Farms, making prairie practical in the agricultural conservation context, and our research and restoration program, Justin Meison's work, where we're trying to create applied research that focuses on practices that are going on right now, approved by the various CRP specifications at a scale that's appropriate for decision makers and practitioners. using the same equipment, seeding rates, paying a lot of attention to cost effectiveness of practices, and basically making trying to create knowledge from these experiments that can be used by people making decisions now. And our perspective is very pro Prairie, as our name implies, where CRP is concerned. It can be summed up as we can do better. This is valuable land that's being taken out of production. That's a serious thing. And there are limited opportunities in our area to create habitat that's so sorely missing. So if a landowner's decided to plant CRP, you're planning on this being there for at least 10 years, why not get the maximum ecological function from it that you possibly can? And that means that you're actually going to see the species that you plant in good amounts, and they're going to persist over time. You're going to get soil erosion control and a plant community that's resistant to weed invasion, not impermeable, but resistant. And there's going to be a diversity of flowers and grassy species that are active and blooming throughout the season from May till October. All CR plantings are not alike. They don't all produce the same benefits. Maybe from a distance they might all look alike, but once you get in there, once you dive in, kind of like going snorkeling, in a coral reef, wow, you really see a lot. Many of these CRP plantings in the surveys we've done become mixtures of big blue stem, and then brome, reed canary grass, Canada goldenrod, and milkweed. Those last four we didn't even plant, right? They just came on their own. So we think we can do better, and that it's possible to kind of lift the general performance of CRP through better knowledge and better practice. So with that as kind of our mission here, some guiding ideas. And I will be really interested in the discussion to see how you perceive these things. But a basic observation about prairie planting is that the seeds are tiny. And this might seem obvious, but it has huge implications. And not only are they tiny, but they're diverse. They're diverse in their form, their shape, their color, as the image suggests, but also in their requirements and what they need to establish. They're all picky in their own little way. So that creates a problem when you're trying to treat them like corn and plant them all at once at one time of the year and one seed bed, when they evolved with very different types of conditions for their optimal establishment. So they're tiny and they have very diverse needs. The second idea is that the seed mix that we put on the ground determines the ecological benefits that we're going to get very strongly. And it also determines whatever drawbacks there are or whatever shortcomings there are going to be reflected in that seed mix. And so we want to think about what it is we want to gain at the end. And because there's no do-overs in this process, right? This is like building a house and establishing a foundation. You can't really go back, right? It's there. And so with that in mind, that planning process is crucial. And the first year of establishment has a very strong influence on what you get by year 5 or year 9. And so unlike cropping systems where you're used to being able to say, well, I screwed up this year, but I know how to do better. We aren't afforded that luxury with a prairie planting. And so it makes that planning process and the interaction with the decision makers, with the other things going on in the farm, so important and so hard to do, really. And that's that. So those are those 3 ideas. So native seeds and seedlings are tiny, and they all have different needs, unlike what we're used to, number 2 dent and soybeans, and just a few of the images that Justin has made of these really intriguing and colorful and unique species of seeds. We just can't get enough pictures of seeds around here. And many of these are less than what is that? 1,000th of a gram? Yes. 30,000 seeds per ounce is there's a lot of seeds that are 30,000 seeds per ounce or less. So what are the implications of that? They're vulnerable. Most require light to germinate, meaning if they're buried, they're just going to stay dormant until something exposes them or they die. Planting methods, the poor planting methods like drilling too deep and soil erosion, movement of soil in the field can bury them. That effectively kills them. They're attacked by soil fungi. Fungi are out there. Ants, crickets, earthworms, mice, other small mammals, birds love seeds. They're just delicious, yummy morsels of protein and fat, and everything is going after them. They lose viability with age. They're alive, and as they sit there over time, their metabolism slows down. They start to lose their ability to germinate. Although many of them can have remarkably long lives in the refrigerator, under dry storage conditions. Once they get out there into the field, the clock is ticking. They can die during germination. It's a very vulnerable time. Mice love seedlings as well. And they're also subject to desiccation before their deep roots develop. They can just simply dry up, especially in the current weather. So doesn't that look delicious, that juicy little seedling? That's what the small mammals think. And they are just tiny. The tinier the seed, the tinier the seedling. We know that seedling establishment is low overall, less than 5% of most seeds establish in our plantings under the best circumstances. And we also have evidence, and this is a graph that Justin has most recently generated, that the establishment rate, the percentage rate there on the left, that y-axis, and that is a log scale. So 1 is 100% germination, right? And is related linear on a log scale to seed size. So larger seeds like the one clear over on the right, which is a compass plant, have a higher germination rate and establishment rate rather than tiny things like, say, mountain mint, the pickveer down there on the bottom left. There's a lot of variation, but seed size is a good predictor of establishment rate. Another implication of tiny size is that tiny seedlings don't compete well with existing vegetation. They just don't. This is a grass waterway spray out experiment that we're conducting at Urban Prairie with no spray out or one time spraying out with glyphosate or twice. And then the seeds planted into that. And if you have no herbicide to knock out the existing perennial vegetation, you get no native plants growing there from seed. They just don't do it. And with it really takes 2 spray outs with glyphosate to get decent establishment over 15 plants per meter squared. And when we plant into when we plant into soybean stubble, which has had weeds controlled and no perennial weeds to speak of, we get about 28 stems per meter squared instead of 15, just to give you a sense of it. So the existing vegetation really, really matters with these tiny seeds. They just don't stand a chance. Another implication is burial. A lot of people say, well, I'll use my grain drill. I can adapt it, but that's risky. We did an experiment at the Tallgrass Prairie Center testing an especially tiny seed mix. 90% of the seeds were less than 1,000th of a gram. This was disked and harrowed after corn. And then some plots were drilled and some plots were surface seeded, just drop seeded basically from our same drill. And the tiny seeded seed mix really benefited from that surface seeding compared to a drill. Even though that was a specialized drill for prairie planting, they still benefited more from just being dropped on the surface than being part of that no-till drill. Excuse me. There were a couple of larger seeded species that needed burial, so they did more poorly, but when you balance that with how many larger seeded species you actually have in a seed mix. So this was an important thing that has affected the way we do all of our other plantings now on at Urban Prairie. We're broadcasting, whereas before we were drilling. And that's what that looks like in the drill. There's still a lot of seeds on the surface, but it's probably most of them have been, even so, if they're forb seeds, they've been seeded too deep. So the second big point out of 3 points is that the seed mix, that is the species by seeding rate, right? So it's not just the list of species, it's how much of each species is in here. And think of a bag of granola, right? You can have bags of granola that are really inexpensive and it's just basically rolled oats and, honey or corn syrup. Or you can have really fancy ones that have whole almonds and walnuts and pecans and coconut flakes and all that. So it's the seed mix. It's not just the quantity, it's not just the list of species, but how much you get of each one. Bird seed's another example. Go to the store and buy bird seed. It could be all millet with just a few, sunflower seeds in there, and it's not a very good bird seed. So you're getting the benefits or the shortcomings depending on what you choose. A lot of people are motivated to plant pollinator plantings, pollinator gardens that really focus on the bumblebees and especially the monarch butterflies. Excuse me. And that's great. But it's a kind of more of a gardening situation. And in this example, this is our seed production plot of meadow blazing star. Yeah, you get a ton of monarch butterflies, but it has to be weeded and mowed, and there's nothing else to hold the soil, and it has a lot of shortcomings, things that it has to be very heavily maintained to get this kind of show-stopping amount of monarchs. Out at Urban Prairie, we're doing very diverse mixtures that include grasses and different kinds of grasses and different kinds of forbs blooming in all different seasons. And so we're trying to capture a wider range of benefits. And that's really where we think CRP plantings need to focus, is on that wider range of benefits. In order to test seed mixes and to compare seed mix designs, you really have to drill down into the data. And yes, that's my joke. Please forgive me for the terrible pun. But we've done 2 long-term and multifactorial experiments, one at the Nashua experiment station there in the county north of us, and starting in 2015, and the second starting at UNI on our land in 2018. The experiment at UNI consists of 2 planting dates, a dormant season planting and a spring season planting, 3 seed mixes, which consist of 3 different grass to forb ratios, a pollinator mix, 1 grass to 3 forbs, a balanced mix that is 50-50 grass to forb, and an economy mix, which would correspond to that CP25 mix of 3-to-1. And those were the prices in 2018 or 2016, depending on which experiment. The Nashua experiment didn't include the dormant versus spring planting aspect. And then there's also a first-year mowing treatment that I won't talk about today. This is what it looked like in that first year. And you can see the mowed versus unmowed, and the colors are the different seed mixes. And here's what it looked like a couple of years later. You can still see those seed mix boundaries, which is terribly satisfying to see a seed mix actually show up, and visually you can walk by and you can tell. And I won't go through the long and hairy details of the results of that study, but the second or third year results were published in Restoration Ecology. And just when we look at the different functions that we would like to see out of a planting, here's what we get. The grass dominated and the grass forb balanced mix provide great erosion control, they provide weed resistance, and they provide the opportunity to use fire. There's enough litter on the ground for a fire to run through. However, they're a little bit, if you look at the pollinator mix that's forb dominated, it's great at pollinator resources. There's lots of wildflowers blooming, but you can't use fire. It's not resistant to weeds. It's not resistant to erosion control. So from a perspective of multifunctional, creating a multifunctional habitat, it's kind of like that row of flowers that I showed you first. Yeah, it's great at one thing, but we really need it to be great at several things. And that 50-50 mix of grasses and forbs, which also had a diversity of types of grassy plants in it, was good at a lot of things. Now, it's not low cost like the grass-dominated mix. So another aspect of this was the dormant versus spring planting. And again, I kind of want to drill down a little bit and introduce a little bit of data. This is the only heavy-duty graph I'm going to show, but it's pretty neat. I'm going to have to take another sip of water. I mentioned that these seeds have different requirements, right? They're different from one another, and this data reflects that very important point. If you look at how many native species are in these plots, just species richness, which is kind of our yield if you're an ecologist or restoration ecologist, how many species can I get, right? That's something we really like to see, just that total number of species. The economy mix, which is the grass-dominated mix, there on the left, has the fewest number of species, as you would expect. And the dormant season triangles are not different from the spring planting circles. They're basically the same. But if you look at the other two mixes, the diversity and the pollinator mix, there's a huge difference in species from the dormant season planting versus the spring planting. The triangles there are much higher. And that's showing us that when you have more species that are forbs in the seed mix, that dormant season planting will do better. There will be a lot of species. Another way to put it is, you look at that pollinator mix, that circle, there's a lot of species that were planted in those plots that we never saw. We planted them, we paid for the seed, we never saw them. That's a big disappointment, right? If you pay for that seed, you want it to show up. Most of the CP42 pollinator mixes that were planted in that big pollinator boom were planted in the spring. So think of all that opportunity lost, all those seeds that were put in the ground that didn't show up just because they were planted at the wrong time of year. We've seen this. This is confirmed in our results at Irvine Prairie, where we did a fall 21 planting there in the bottom right of the map, and a spring 22 planting. And the differences were just night and day. You could walk there and you could see the line. You could just see the line of the difference between those two plantings, with many more species and a wider variety of types of species in that fall dormant planting. And Justin here is able to keep track of all this because he's got this GPS antenna on his hat and can just see where he is on his phone, which I think is amazing. So just to kind of continue this comparison of these three seed mixes, and to finish up with that, as we saw, this grass forb balanced and forb dominated mixes benefit from dormant seeding, and they benefit from surface seeding because they have so many tiny seeds in them. If you're planting a grass dominated mix, it will do better in the spring, and it probably does better with drilling. So I think a lot of what we've learned about the grass dominated seed mixes we tend to plant with CRP is not true once you get into the higher diversity, more functional more interesting mixes that more closely resemble prairie restoration. So many seeds, many needs. That's the basic idea. Seeding in May and June favors warm season grasses and late summer flowers. Seeding in the dormant season, late fall into winter. Cool season grasses benefit, sedges benefit, those spring blooming wildflowers benefit. So midsummer wildflowers doesn't matter. They do fine either way. And that's also in another paper in restoration ecology. So I think we are getting to our third guiding idea, and that is that the first year really determines success, and the planning process is crucial, and because there's no do-overs. And this gets into the work that we've done in implementing these ideas and trying them out on cooperating farmers. This is the Larry Roadman farm, the Roadman family farm near Dyke, very ideally close to us. We've had several field days there over the years, and we've planted several different seed mixes at different times, pollinator mix, a diversity mix, and then working with different mixtures of grasses, the simple grass mixes versus the more diverse grass mixes. And one of the things that we have benefited from that's humbling is that, we know that we can get better success if we can control every aspect of this process. We design the seed mix. We can get in there with our equipment and do it at exactly the right time to really favor those little seeds and seedlings that we know are so vulnerable. But the fact is that farm life is complicated. And so, these things don't always happen on the time schedule that you would like. And that's really the point of these case studies that Andy has been developing, just sort of the blow-by-blow description of different types of prairie strips projects that have been done with the cooperating farmers, and the timeline, and working with them and with the farm operator on implementing these things. Here's just a picture of that the prairie strip tile line camera. So in summary, what we've learned: it's possible to have high performing CRP plantings if the landowner and decision maker is on board. That could include a farm manager, professional farm manager, the operator. If they're willing to spend a little more on seed than the minimum, they're going to see a much greater benefit on their land. It's hard to get across the idea that there are no do-overs here. I think that's something that's holding people back from putting that extra effort and energy into the initial planning. But we do understand how complicated this gets, and how many other priorities are higher than an excellent CRP planting. And it's just planning around the needs of these tiny diverse seeds and seedlings. It's complicated by the realities of farm operations, but I think if we can help to educate ourselves about what would be ideal and make some of these big shifts from spring to dormant seeding and from drill to surface seeding, I think that'll go a long way to improving the overall quality of our plantings. And we're excited to help anybody who's interested in that to have more success in that area. Some of the different partnerships we've had, I'll just go through that, put them on there real quick, and look forward to our discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. If you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide. So if you attended today's webinar for a CCA CEU, you can email Elena Whitaker, that's ALENAW at iastate.edu today by 5 p.m. to get that credit. We appreciate those that join us for those credits. You can send her your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar if it happened to be different, and your CCA number to make sure that you get properly credited. All right, and then our next slide is one that's probably familiar to most of you that have attended a webinar already this year. It's going to be our voluntary USDA survey. You can find that link at iowalearningfarms.org/survey. And if you can hit back one slide there.
Sorry.
That's okay. There's a QR code that if it's easier to just scan it with your phone, it's a very simple survey. If you've already done it for 2023, you do not need to complete it again, but we appreciate your feedback as a USDA funded program. And then yes, our next slide is promoting our final webinar of 2023. So you can make plans to join us December 20th. If you wouldn't mind going to the next one for me. We're going to have Brad Jordan Redlin from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And he's going to be sharing a little bit about the Minnesota Agricultural Water Quality Certification Program. So you can join us next week to learn a little bit about their program, and we appreciate you attending all of our webinars so far this year. And we have had quite a few questions come in. So I know there's a few other folks online that may be jumping in to answer these questions. So I'll let you all decide who maybe is the best person to address each question.
Sure. Okay.
So our first question here comes in and says, I'm trying to establish buffalo grass as the primary species in my turf area of the yard. The Kentucky bluegrass keeps creeping in. Any recommendations to stop the encroachment?
That's not something that we have done any experiments on or have any experience ourselves. So we try to stay away from just, shooting our mouths off on stuff we haven't had experience. Depending on your climate, buffalo grass, I grew up in north central Kansas, where buffalo grass is competitive with Kentucky bluegrass. But that's because it's, 10 inches less rainfall and a lot hotter. And so I can't imagine trying to do battle between buffalo grass and Kentucky bluegrass in this climate.
Okay, so
Kentucky bluegrass is going to win.
Looks like, so with the establishment rate / seed size chart slide, where there was a 5% survival based on the amount of pure live seed, or was that based on pure live seed or bulk seed?
Pure live seed.
Okay.
Yeah. Everything's based on pure live seed.
Okay. So kind of tying in, following that up, as we think about getting these seeded for their seed bed preparation, when you were talking about your different rounds of glyphosate application, the understanding that the recommendation is 2 rounds, but often hear from landowners that are not comfortable with the chemicals, ask if there are other methods. Are there other seed bed preparations that can be as effective as glyphosate that are cost effective for large area? They're noting that solarization doesn't seem to be an effective method.
Yeah, especially for large area. I totally get that people don't want to use herbicide, but our, one perspective is you're using it one season and then you're getting prairie for the rest of your life. And, banishing herbicide from there on out. Repeated tillage will do it, but if you have a large area and it's sloping ground, you're gonna encounter a lot of soil erosion and also degradation of soil quality. So this is the difficult thing. Now we did an experiment. I did an experiment with a grad student back in the late 1990s, starting with not turf grass, but with species poor prairie. It was just all switchgrass, Indian grass, big blue stem. And we burned, overseeded with forbs, and then we mowed weekly for a season. And we were able to successfully establish those forbs because we weakened the warm season grasses. And the forbs stay short, right? The first year, their roots are growing down. So it's okay to mow them a lot because they're not getting their heads chopped off. We did raise the mower bar a little bit over time, but that's with warm season grasses. There's a practitioner out in southeastern Iowa who's been using, for 20 years, her family has been converting a brome and fescue pasture to prairie through annual burning. So they're overseeding and then they're burning annually. So that's the other strategy. So they're all going to involve a lot of work.
And so on that relationship with glyphosate, is there any concern that there will be residual that could impact the prairie seedlings establishment?
Justin, do you want to take that one?
Yep. So with glyphosate, no, there's not going to be a residual. Um, in fact, we sometimes, depending on the experiment, we'll see, within a couple days of the applications, and typically that glyphosate's broken down, at least based on the we know published about glyphosate, it breaks down in the soil pretty quickly. So we've never seen any issues from that. Now, having said that, there are potential issues with a lot of conventional cropping schemes that you might be going out of and putting prairie into. Um, any uh, any kind of herbicide regime that you're using pre-emergence. A lot of those pre-emergents have very long life in the soil. That's kind of what they're designed to do, right? So definitely check the label on those to make sure that you're not going to run into those issues. So yeah, so herbicide residuals are an important thing to think about.
Here's a question about native prairie species. Can they be mixed to be seeded with cool season cover crops to be successful? And if so, how thick or thin should that cover crop be?
No. Justin?
So it depends on what you're imagining. If this is a cover crop that's going to be put, used in a annual cropping system, I probably suggest foregoing the prairie plants because they're all long-lived species that don't establish very quickly. So by the time you're ready to plant your crop, your prairie stuff will be hardly a seedling.
I think this is meaning like knowing that prairie establishes slowly and you're trying to maybe protect the soil.
Okay, so
to give them a head start. Some people have utilized cover crops with the prairie to get that protection.
Yep. So thinking about it, sometimes that's called a nurse crop too. So yeah, we do that at all of our, actually, Laura just pulled up a perfect example. Anytime that we're seeding into bare soil, we like to use a cover crop, especially if we're seeding in the fall. It's a nice, we need to do some research on this, but I have a supposition that having that standing vegetation during the winter, if you're doing a dormant seeding, a broadcast seeding, that'll help reduce some wind erosion that can take some of the seeds. So we've had really good success doing that. So yeah, pretty much your typical cover crops work well. Oats and winter wheat are the most used by kind of prairie people, I would say. There's a little bit of hesitancy using annual rye, which actually isn't that annual, and also it has some documented allelopathic effects. And
About how many pounds of oats or wheat are you using?
Typically using about a bushel an acre for that stuff. Pounds per acre. We've gone lower for some seedings, 10 to 15 pounds, and then a little higher for winter wheat.
All right, we've got a lot of great questions, so I'm going to try and keep this going. So for the dormant planting benefits graph, when were the native species richness counted? Is this year 1, year 2, year 3, and does that change over time?
Yeah, so I believe this was counted in is this the second year, Justin? Yeah, species richness second year 2. And this was a meandering walk of, getting all the species richness in those plots as opposed to a random sample. So it's a more complete count. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I believe so. Yep.
Yeah.
So any tips for establishing prairie in difficult soils like low pH prone soil that you often might see in reclaimed strip mines?
Yeah.
It's a very specific question.
I'm gonna say no, because we haven't tried that. And I want to go back to the other question because there were some other good questions in there. Does that change over time? we are seeing pretty good persistence in these plots. This question of what are the chances of seeds that didn't show up because they were seeded at the wrong time to eventually show up a few years down the road, we've given that question a lot of thought. Is this something where if you just wait long enough, those species will show up? They're sort of taken on faith idea. They're in there, we planted them, they're going to come up eventually. And fortunately, the advantage of having these small research plots and very intensive sampling, as in army crawl, elbow on your belly through the plot, the answer is no. We do know what's coming up. And we know that if we haven't seen it by year 2, it's not really going to get there, except from seeding in from somewhere else later on, so that year 1, year 2, yeah, there'll be a few seedlings that'll come up from, a spring planting. They're dormant, they stay there, they might come up in year 2. Most of them are going to get outcompeted with what's there right now. They don't have much of a chance. There are a few species that do. But this method, from what we're doing at this experimental level, these are real results. We're not going to find out something different in a few years. And we have continued to follow these plots over time. Now, Justin, if I've just said something different from what our data says, please correct me.
I'll add that on the taking a higher view, it's true that we don't typically see a lot of new things after the first, even in the first couple of years. But we do. There are definitely what we call high conservation coefficient or conservative species that do tend to. A couple of them that are sort of ones that are hard to find initially. They grow really slowly. They do show up a little later. But when you're talking about stand establishment or, do you have a successful planting? You can definitely tend to tell that pretty early on. But things do change. But you do if you look hard enough, you do find most stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Question here, if you could return to your partnerships slide, and while you're doing that, maybe these two kind of go together. Someone's a little confused on the no do-overs. So if you can help clarify that a little bit, but also maybe tied into someone's asking, they've got 75 acres of CRP, seeded both grasses and forbs, but they're curious, is there anything they can do to improve it without starting over?
Yeah. Yeah. So the do-overs means that, once, and these two kind of relate to each other, actually. So if you start with, let's say, a heavy, as happened a few years ago, people were planting, like 8 seeds of big bluestem and switchgrass and Indian grass per square foot, very heavy seeding rates of very aggressive warm season grasses, and a few forbs, a good number for that time. You end up with a field that is dominated by those warm season grasses, and the many of the forbs are just squeezed out. And what can you do about that later on? That's what I mean by the do-overs. It's hard to reverse that, right? Because it's all there. And we've just said that tiny seedlings don't do well. There's no maternal care, right? These big plants are just going to whomp them. They're just going to kill them. So, or if you've ever had a chicken, had a bunch of chickens, the older hens you throw in a little chick there, the older hens will just kill it, right? So that's what I mean. There's no do-overs. You don't get a second chance. Now, Muriel's question about putting in 75 acres in the CRP. First of all, yay, thank you. That's wonderful. That's a lot of CRP. That's fantastic. Any suggestions for improvement? It sort of depends on what you've got there. But the technique of burning, overseeding with more forbs, if that's how you need to improve it, and then mowing that area that you are overseeding with forbs will give you more forbs in the grass stand. Now, if it's an issue of invasive species, it depends on the species. If it's a woody species, frequent burning will be necessary. If it's brome, burning will help depending on the time of year that you do it. Reed canary grass, we're not even going to go there. It's just, it's hard. So it sort of depends on what the improvements are that you want.
All right, so then hopping down to if we're establishing that, what are some of the dormant seeding variables that you've noticed that actually help establishment? So if they're going to do dormant seeding, what things should they keep in mind to help with establishment?
Yeah. Well, we've already mentioned having a cover crop on there so that, or nurse crop, so to kind of keep that wind erosion down. Broadcast seeding seems to work fine in at least in soybean stubble, and there's a lot of people who are saying that it works well in corn stubble too. So we're curious about that. We like to do some studies on that. Other than that, bumping up the grass, the warm season grass component, because warm season grasses do suffer a little bit in establishment. Fortunately, warm season grass seed is cheap, so it's not really a hit to do that in if you're planting in the dormant season. So those are some of the things that that make a difference. Also, making sure the soil is cool enough. Dormant means not September and really not even October. We don't want anything germinating by accident and then just getting killed over the winter. So it really needs to be, mid-November is when we would like that to happen.
This kind of ties into that time frame as you were just talking. Someone asked a question about the time frame of dormant seeding. They also hear frost seeding, which makes them think January, February. But if you're talking fall seeding with a nurse crop like oats, what's the pros and cons of those two time periods?
Yeah, well, anything that is going to work that seed into the ground subsequent to seeding. So frost seeding is great. The freeze thaw cycle, snow. We timed our plantings this year so that there was a little bit of snow that came right afterwards, and that's a nice way to help get that seed into the ground, or light rain, not heavy rain. Please don't have heavy rains. Last year with the dormant season in 2022, we had terrible wind erosion, but there's not a lot of control over that other than having some cover crop or nurse crop to mitigate that. But we did have some disappointing areas at Urban Prairie where the wind just blew sediment onto the field and buried our seeds. So some of that is kind of out of your control, right? But it is in the spring too. There's stuff that you can control, and then there's stuff that it gets thrown at you, and you're just trying to mitigate those things. And Justin, what am I missing here? Justin or Andy?
One thing you can consider doing would be if the soil is not really frozen. Like last week, you could have got out there and did some cultipacking. Some kind of if you broadcast in the dormant season, helps to get some degree of seed to soil contact. So snow can help you do that, but also if you really you can also use cultipackers or rollers to help improve that. Other thing would be not avoiding times when there's ice on the ground. Again, you trying to make sure that there's seed to soil contact is important. So we do, snow is interesting because it kind of will melt into the soil, whereas ice, there's a big potential for wind erosion on that. So I will say dormant season planting is a little more complex than your spring plantings can be, but again, the payoffs are potentially pretty big. So that's a couple of the options you got.
And I know we've got a few more questions here that I want to get to before we sign off. And so maybe this is a directing to something on your website, but stats on the importance of mowing frequency and height. You'd mentioned with your graduate student study.
Yeah. Yeah, I can. That study is on our website and in our publication. So there's a published paper on that, but it was weekly, and it started at lawnmower height, 4 inches, and gradually moved up to as high as we could get that mower, which I think was about 13 inches over the season. So by July and August, we were mowing at a higher height.
And then they're curious about drift mitigation as you're trying to establish these. Is there a minimum spacing from a field border, or potentially using a physical barrier like trees and shrub plantings to help protect the prairie?
We don't like shrubs and trees next to prairies. They just cause trouble. we cut them. We have to seed in. We did have a little bit of drift. We're at Irvin Prairie. We're planting into soybean stubble every year from last year's crop. So we always have crops and prairie plantings cheek to jowl. It was pretty minor. And it was easily mitigated. The prairie plants just kind of grew in. I mean, we reported everything, but it wasn't too bad. I would not. After that, these prairie plants are pretty tough, and you're going to see a lot of edge effects from brome moving in from the edges and other things. Moving in that are invasive species issues. But I don't, and if you're doing prairie strips that are very narrow, we do see those strips gradually narrow due to various things, whether it's tillage or whether it is herbicide drift. So if it's that narrow 30-foot infield prairie strip, but you can't really, the only mitigation is for the spray operator to pay attention to wind direction, and to use the appropriate cautions there. But of course, you couldn't put trees there right there on the prairie strip. So
this will be our final question, and maybe this is a clarification for others too, but they're asking if you can spike in new seeds in second or third year planting after a burn.
I would say absolutely not. I mean, that's pretty. Scientists don't like to say the word absolutely, but think of all the money you're spending on those seeds, and if they have only a 5% chance of making it off of bare ground, and then you're planting them into something where the plants are already established, it's probably a tenth of that or less. So if you've got a lot of money to spend and just really pound it with lots and lots of seeds, you could probably get some to establish. I'm not saying nothing will happen, but burning doesn't really set anything back, right? The prairie plants they love it. They eat that for lunch. So burning is just making the existing plants stronger and those seedlings at even greater disadvantage. I don't know, but Andy or Justin, feel free to contradict me if there's hope. We'd like to provide it.
I'd add a little. Depends on. So I think Laura's very correct that especially in a in a young prairie planting, that would be not a wise choice because if you wanted any of your seeds to grow, you'd have to be mowing that stand the entire year for any hope of the seedlings to establish into mature plants. So, and that's going to have a lot of detrimental impact to an establishing prairie. So that's too early to be trying to make that kind of a remedy, unless you have a very poor stand, in which case you could probably reseed basically. But you'd want to think about what is what's there, and if it's failing because of cool season grass that's actually not gone, that would be something that you'd need to remedy. But if for whatever reason you just have maybe you had a really bad wind and rain event and you just simply lost your seed, then something like a reseeding in year 3 could be worthwhile. But So yeah, it kind of you have to be out there kind of diagnosing the problem before going ahead and spending all that money, in my opinion.
Yeah, good point, Justin. I was thinking of a good stand, trying to add seeds to a good stand. But if it's a very poor stand with just a lot of annual weeds, that might be what you have to do to remedy that situation.
And on that note, there are opportunities for cost assistance with establishing these from a variety of sources. CRP was mentioned, so that's a Farm Service Agency program. There are other programs and even private incentives as well. So our friends over at Practical Farmers of Iowa also have some additional opportunities to get involved with that. So you can contact Grace Yee over there at Practical Farmers. So on that note, we thank you all for your time at the Tallgrass Prairie Center, for joining us, and everyone who tuned in today. There's clearly a lot of interest in prairie and what we can do to help bring that back on our landscape. So hopefully you'll get a lot of questions after this too, as people are looking to do this on their farms and on their land as well. So thank you again, and we hope to see you all next week for our final webinar of the year.
Thank you.